Wishing you all a super warm welcome to Connecting with Purpose, where we connect with winners and thought leaders from multiple sectors to provide you with a 360-degree view on purpose. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Our purpose, to inspire you to unlock your potential and optimize your performance and impact. Today, I'm honoured to be joined by Steve Tew, one of the world's most respected leaders in the business of sport. As the former CEO of the most successful sports franchise in the history of sports, the incredible New Zealand All Blacks. Steve's 40-year career started at New Zealand University's Sports Union, with the last 25 years being committed primarily to rugby through the amazing Canterbury Rugby Union and the Crusaders, prior to joining the New Zealand Rugby Union in 2001, which he took over as CEO in 2007, through to the end of 2019. I was lucky enough to work closely, albeit virtually and briefly, with Steve last year at USA Rugby, and I'm really excited to welcome him as our guest here on Purpose Fuse today. So, Steve, thanks for being here with us.
Kia ora, thanks very much.
So I'm going to kick off, Steve, with, rather than sort of going step by step through your career, we like to sort of get to know our guests a little bit with what we call magic moments. These are sort of benchmark experiences. If you had to give them a score, you'd give them a 10 out of 10, because they're experiences or memories that sort of pivotal in your development for one reason or another. And you've obviously had an incredible career. When you look back on it, could you perhaps pull out maybe 3 magic moments that stood out to you, and what were they? What was it that made them magic? And if you had to give each of them a name, what would you call them?
Well, I mean, the 3, without being too corny, the 3 most magic moments for me are my 3 daughters. So, you know, you live your life through your kids to an extent, don't you? So we've now got 3 adult daughters, and they're all making an impact on the world in their own right. So that's pretty special. So I would never overlook that when talking about what's been important in my life. But I guess from a sport and a career perspective, I've been very fortunate to work in an industry that I genuinely believe makes humanity better. I think communities that embrace not just competitive sport, but active recreation, whatever it might be, that gets people physically active and I think mentally and physically in better shape is pretty special to be able to do that all my life. And rugby is the sport that I particularly have a passion for, not unusual in New Zealand, obviously. So I've been very privileged to have been involved with a lot of very, very successful teams filled with great people. Anytime you're involved with the team that wins, particularly a championship or a big event like a World Cup or a Crusaders, they're pretty special. I had, I guess, the first one of those way back in '97 with the Canterbury Union when we won the NPC. I'd call that a pivotal moment, because we had a team that needed to do better, and we made a lot of change, and that was the beginning of an era that continues with the success of the Crusaders today. So that was pretty special. The day that we were named to host the Rugby World Cup, it was in November in 2005 in Dublin, and no one really gave New Zealand a chance of winning that bid. And I think of the work that's being done in the US right now for 2029 or 2031. It's got some comparisons really, because it's a little bit of a braver call than some of the traditional calls. People thought New Zealand would be too small, out of time zones, commercially disadvantaged, all that sort of thing. And then we went on and I think hosted a very successful Rugby World Cup in 2011, and of course the day we won that by 1 point against France was pretty special, because the All Blacks hadn't won a World Cup since 1987. So it was a bit of a drag on our legacy, if you like. So that moment was incredibly special. And then it's not so much a moment. It's about a period of time when our game was under a bit of pressure, because we had players, both professional and those playing in the community, that were, I guess, involved in behaviour that just reflected some of the realities of society. Young men misbehave, involved with some of the darker statistics in our country around domestic violence and youth suicide, and some of the things that afflict young people today. And the game was under a bit of pressure about its culture, a lot of media attention on the game, and we took a deep breath and said, rather than just blame the fact that we reflected New Zealand, we said we actually can help New Zealand, because we have an influence in this country that's greater than most people would probably understand, I think, if you don't live in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So we took a deep breath and opened up ourselves to a very wide-ranging independent review. and created a program of activity after that, which was all about respect and inclusion and making the game a safer, more inclusive place for people to come and play at every level. And in doing so, confronted some of those, those sort of, I guess, deep rooted prejudices, biases, and some of the behaviours that we needed to deal with. And so that was a pretty proud moment when we took that deep breath and did that work. Not a particular moment in time, took a long time, and it's ongoing. But yeah, that's pretty special for me. I think again that was probably a transformational moment for the game.
And I was going to dig into culture a little bit later on, but I think this is a good opportunity now, just to look at it from this way of essentially a challenge with the respect and inclusion program that you just referred to, with some behaviours that weren't becoming of, if you like, of humanity and representative of New Zealand, and certainly not representative of what you would want to see from the players representing the union or the clubs. What were some of the sort of must-haves, some of the things you absolutely had to do to start to change that culture, and when was it you could see that it was starting to have some holding and that change was actually taking place?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's probably a metaphor about what sort of, because people use culture a lot around professional sport and high-performing teams. And really, it's about the environment you create and the expectations of the people inside that environment. So one thing that came out of the work that was done by the review group was that there was an awful lot of really good things that happened in our game. There were some brilliant examples of rugby being a caring community, a community that intervened at times of hardship or stress, of a sport that gave young people at all levels, not just those that were lucky enough to go on and be professional or play for our Black Ferns or our All Blacks, but even in a club rugby environment, young people got an opportunity to learn, develop, grow, have experiences, and develop relationships with people that were strong influences on them. So there's a lot of good stuff happening. But ultimately, what the review really needed us to do was just to create an environment where people genuinely cared for each other, where we made, and this is what needs to be reflected in a high performing team or a high performing organisation in any discipline. So yeah, caring environment. You needed to have really good people. You had to have those people sitting in the right seat in the bus. You had to know what the purpose was inside that bus, and I know that's a strong angle for you. In my lifetime, I guess purpose has probably had a series of names depending on what's come out of Harvard at the last iteration of the thinking, and currently I think it's actually encapsulated really well with the word purpose. What is it that gives a group of people a common bond to get on and do stuff? And in sport, that is obviously train hard, teamwork, discipline, some of the things we've always talked about inside the teams that I've been associated with. And bearing in mind, I've been an administrator, not a coach or a player, so I'm a little bit on the periphery, but you can take some of these things and apply them, I think, into any team, whether that be in sport or business or family or community for that matter. It's about having honest conversations. It's about dealing with the awkward facts that not everything lines up as you would want it to be, right? You've got to deal with stuff. So you need to deal with things quickly. You've got to pick up the little bits of rubbish before you're living in a rubbish dump. You deal with the little things before they become big things. But also focus on the things that make the most difference. Let's not sweat every single little detail. Pick out the critical things that really need to be done right. And I think that's one of the things that you notice if you watch an athlete that performs at a high level for a long period of time. They really focus in on what they're good at, and they continue to hone those skills or that particular attribute, and they'll focus on a small number of things that they know they need to improve to be better. And again, they will put a lot of hard graft into all of those sort of things. But ultimately, Mark, we have a saying in New Zealand: "Hey tangata, hey tangata, hey tangata." It is the people. It is the people. It is the people. And ultimately, that's what it always comes down to. If you haven't got the right people bonded by a common purpose, know their role in that purpose, genuinely believe in it, so they're inspired by it every day, then you won't be successful. And we wouldn't have been successful in kicking off a program of, I guess, activity and honesty around what we needed to do to make the culture of our game more positive for our country.
Amazing. And And I guess I love what you said in your opinion on purpose, not necessarily the latest Harvard thinking, but it's a common bond that sort of ties people together to get stuff done. Not exact quote, but it was something similar to that. And I suppose to me that's really, really helpful, because some of the challenges around purpose are that people think it's just a nice thing, and it's a nice thing to have, and yeah, it'd be nice to have a purpose, but like, how does it actually make a difference? Whereas when you look at it as simply as you're saying, which is, look, it's a common bond that is something that ties us all together to get stuff done. It makes, as I would say, makes purpose a bit more pointy. And so when you look at the All Blacks and some of the other teams associated, obviously, with the New Zealand Rugby Union, all of which are extremely successful, how do you view that purpose as being something that actually enables people to perform at their best and enables people to support each other and hold each other accountable, versus being just sort of this nice to have thing that maybe sits on a marketing brochure somewhere?
Yeah, well, I think we're probably both of the same ilk. Purpose, or whatever you want to call it, it's not just something you stick on the wall. If that's what you do, it won't be effective. I think inside the All Black and the Black Ferns, I should mention, because our women's team has been actually more successful over time. Haven't played as many games because that's been the nature of the women's sport for too long probably period of time. But if you look at their winning ratio, they're right up there. But if we talk about the All Blacks, the purpose of the All Blacks in my time, it evolved actually, because initially when the group that I was associated with, and we've had two or three iterations of that, I guess, they really wanted to be a great, they call it GOAT, and they want to be a great team. And then eventually that evolved into what they were trying to achieve, because they became, I guess, the winningest rugby side reasonably quickly in the professional era. We were building on a strong legacy, because even in the 110 or whatever it was years of amateur rugby, the All Blacks had won 70% of the time. First 10 years of professional rugby, it grew into the 80s, and then in the last decade or so, it's hovered around the 90%, which, as you kindly pointed out, is pretty special. I think the key thing for that team is that it was always challenging itself to redefine that purpose. And so while it started off wanting to be a great rugby team, then it wanted to be a great team, not necessarily just rugby. And in fact, then it wanted to become a great team, not recognised by itself, but recognised by others in whatever field you looked at. So they were more interested in comparing not just their winning ratio, but the way they won, the way they carried themselves, the things that they did, or do, I should say, because it's a living beast, against other high-performing organisations. So they used to start talking about the Bolshoi Ballet or the Navy SEALs, and the people, our people used to go and visit some of those organisations just to get a sense of what they could learn from and share from those sort of places. But I come back to it. The purpose is one bit; it gets you started. The All Blacks and our rugby teams have a distinct advantage in that they inherit this incredibly deep legacy. I think we're fortunate that our national colour is black. We have a silver fern; it's a very striking emblem. And there's they talk about deepening the blackness of the jersey. They talk about picking the jersey up, and if you are, depending on how well you know our game, but if you are Sam Kane coming into the number 7 jersey after it's been worn for 148 test matches by Richie McCaw, who won something like 137 of those games, you know that jersey requires you to do something very special when you're wearing it. So you're able to put yourself into the dark place, if you like, both physically and mentally, to make a sacrifice so that when you take that jersey off, it's darker, it's blacker, the legacy has been deepened. And that's an incredibly motivating force. And that's built into the purpose, if you like, of the All Blacks. They're very conscious of looking after what they've inherited, what they're lucky enough to pick up. And
so the dark place for your guys and girls is a very special place. It's about leaving the jersey in a better place and honouring the legacy that came before you to try to hand something on to the next person that they're equally as proud to try to better beyond that.
Yeah, I mean by the dark place, I mean the physical and mental pain that you have to experience. You don't have to play rugby. I mean, rugby is a very brutal sport, right? It's a collision sport, so there's a physicality that a lot of people can't cope with at any level of the game. And that's fine. there's no sport that's for everybody. Everyone picks and chooses what they like and what gets them motivated. But in preparation, both the mental and physical preparation, you've got to take yourself, if you want to be a high-performing athlete, if you want sustained success at the international level, whether you're a rugby player or a rower or a track and field athlete or a swimmer, you have to be prepared to go through a pain barrier. And you have to be prepared to go through it day in, day out, because you have to be the fittest, you have to be the fastest, you have to be the sharpest mentally, you have to be the person that can respond positively to the pressure that comes from international competition, whether that's against the clock or whether it's against an opposition that's about to physically intimidate you. And that's, if it was easy, we would have all been Olympians and All Blacks, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I know one of the most famous, I know that not everyone obviously listening to this are rugby players, but one of the most famous All Blacks I used to watch on TV, who funnily enough played in the same position as me, was Sean Fitzpatrick, and I've met him a few times. He is involved with Laureate Sports for Good Foundation and being an ambassador for the power of sport to help change young people's lives and the things they can learn out of it. And I know that he wrote a book, and I might get the title wrong, but I think it was something like Winning Matters. And he's one of the people that can write a book with that title. You would be as well. So I mean, what does winning mean to you personally?
Well, I mean, I just acknowledge Fitzy because he's a very special human being and a great All Black, and he's one person that certainly left his mark on that jersey, and his incredibly competitive nature. He competes. He'll compete on who goes and orders the beer at the bar. That's you can't win with Fitzy. So you got to acknowledge people like that. Winning for me, I mean, clearly winning means achieving what you've set out to achieve, and if that's in a sporting contest, then you want to win it. And I've clearly not played at any level that would be of note. But you give me a dartboard or a snooker table or a social game of cricket, and I'm only really interested in one outcome. But it's more than that when you're running an organisation or a team that is important to your country and reflects, as rugby does in New Zealand. It's quite a statement for New Zealand offshore. A lot of people, if you talk about our country, they think of the All Blacks before they think of anything else. So you've got to be very careful how you craft that winning formula, right? So it is about how you carry yourself. It is about, in our game, certainly in our teams and our environments, it's about humility. It is about putting the team first, and integrity is really important. New Zealand has a very good record in international sport, and I say this not wanting to tempt fate, but we don't have a record of taking performance enhancing drugs. We don't have a record of sports betting issues. We've got a deep sense of integrity in this country, and even in our business community, I think we're known as honest brokers in that regard. So I think for me, winning is about winning, clearly, but it's also important to make sure that in getting to that outcome, you've done things right by everybody involved. And nowadays, there's a real focus also. I'm seeing this in my current role. There's a real focus on the well-being of our people, and that's not just how they are physically being looked after. It's also about how their emotional and mental well-being is looked after. So that's also important. You can't win and break a whole lot of athletes and say that was a success.
Yeah, and I mean that's a really good point as well, I think, and pertinent with so many things that have been going on in sports. And obviously, as you know, I'm based in the US, and we kind of see this all the time, to the extent that certain sports and franchises just seem to be almost like a meat grinder, and athletes come in and out they go, and a bunch of more come in and out they go. And I think that, to me, that athlete well-being and supporting athletes with the skills they need even to transition out of sport, not just from a physical perspective, a mental perspective, and purpose, to me, is part of that's a golden thread to that, are absolutely critical. What are some of the things that you guys have done, whether it be with New Zealand Rugby Football Union or in any of your other roles, to sort of take on that responsibility of the overall well-being of your athletes?
Well, we've put it up in lights more recently probably than we did in the past, but even way back in the mid-90s when the game first turned professional, and I had that opportunity to be involved in the early days with the Crusaders, I was fortunate enough to have a bit of time visiting professional sport franchises around the world. I spent a bit of time in the US, and I don't mean to be critical, but one thing that struck me in your country was the very high statistics around ex-athletes being unemployed, divorced, bankrupt, alcohol, drug addictions, suicide. That seemed to me to be something we could learn from. So very early on, we started looking at what kind of programs we could put around players to help them better prepare for life, not just after rugby, but life around rugby, because it's very early to, and nowadays with talent ID being so sharply focused on young people, you're telling a kid very early on they may or may not be able to, they may be able to be a professional sports person, and you don't need them then to give up everything else because this is the holy grail, right? It's not going to be a career forever. You are a selection or injury away from that being over, and you need to be better positioned to deal with that when you finish. But more importantly, and I think this is really where the whole well-being debate in New Zealand is going, it's because it shouldn't be a compliance thing for a sport, right? Have we got all the well-being stuff done that we need to do to look after our kids? Actually, it should be ingrained in your culture. It should be ingrained in your environment. It should be authentic and organic. If you genuinely care for your people and do the sort of things, and these cost money, so resourcing is always an issue. But if you do the sort of things that are going to help your athletes be better people while they're with you, better able to deal with everything that's going on in their lives, including the time they don't spend actually training and playing, competing, then they're going to be better athletes anyway. They're more likely to be able to sustain a longer career. They're more likely to be able to handle the pressure when it's on them in competition if they've got everything in balance off field. But ultimately, and I caught up with an old friend of mine just last evening who's working. She's leading this field in New Zealand Rugby for our Professional Players Association, and it still comes down again to the people. So in some environments, the work that's been done in that program is welcomed. Time is found for it. It's part and parcel of the daily training environment. It's part and parcel of what happens in a week leading into a competition game. But in some other environments where the coaches and the leaders of that group don't see the value of it, it doesn't get the time it needs. And lo and behold, they end up with athletes that don't have sustained success. They don't get the results they want, and they churn through people both physically in terms of injuries, but also in terms of selections and dropping out much more quickly than the organisations that embrace that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think just from some of the words you've used so far in terms of culture needing to be authentic and organic, and that would be including the integration of wellness as part of the core DNA and responsibility of a group of people that we're trying to get to come together and support and perform at their best, let alone what happens to them after they leave. We've set them up for success. But other things like humility and integrity and team first, right? Team first, self last, put the others before yourself, have each other's backs. Obviously, so many takeaways to life beyond sport or life beyond rugby in this instance. And you talked about the environment for culture. To what extent does the New Zealand Rugby Football Union have a responsibility for and is able to support the broader infrastructure of sports across the country with creating that environment for their clubs, for their kids, for their communities? And how did you go about trying to transfer some of that from on the field with the players that are performing at their best to the broader community?
Well, with difficulty, because your reach is only so far. I think the most important thing is that you walk the talk yourself. So if you create a good example, and if you've got an environment where that is what you do genuinely day in, day out, and there are always going to be blips, right? There will always be mistakes made. There will always be people who do something that they will regret, and you've got to deal with that, and hopefully you can put them on the right path and forgive them and keep them going. If you do all of that, then leading by example is a really good way of getting some influence. I think we've, an organisation like New Zealand Rugby, which I've been out of now for a year and a half, has an opportunity to train a lot of people who go back into other environments. You can provide resourcing, certainly now with online teaching and online resources. You can certainly influence parents as first coaches much more than you used to be able to. It's much more direct because we can go straight to them with those types of things. So there's a whole toolkit. But ultimately, as again I said earlier, it comes down to the people, right? If the right people are around those community clubs, around those school teams, around those kids, and people often ask me, why does New Zealand sport bat above its weight so much on the international stage? Because it's not just actually in rugby. I think one of the real competitive advantages are, and we have a number, but one of the real ones is that we have an instinct as parents to coach. We like to take our kids outdoors, teach them how to run, throw, catch, hit, pass, whatever it might be, and we take that on and we coach our kids in their very early sporting experiences. And those coaching moments actually will often shape a child's view of a sport, because if he or she is not feeling included, feeling like he or she can contribute to the team, has some fun with their mates, and that's when winning actually has to be put to one side, right? There's a point. Kids will keep score if they want to, right? You can play any form of the game, any moderated version of any sport, and say, well, we're not keeping score. The kids will come off and know whether they think they won or lost. But that's irrelevant. Did they have fun? Did they get a sense of teamwork? Were they able to contribute?
And so celebrating success is one thing. I think it's a very clear takeaway, as you said, from sports to business. What are some other things from your experience or observations that you feel sports can learn from business, regardless of whether they're easy to talk about, hard to achieve? What do you think's missing in business that are clear takeaways from the world of sport?
Well, I mean, it varies a little bit on the business to a degree. I mean, when they come back to your purpose, if you're a public listed company, you've got a range of shareholders that are looking for a financial profit. That's your purpose. If you're a not-for-profit, then you've probably got a cause. You might be involved in helping a disadvantaged group, or you might be involved in a medical, cancer issue or something like that. I mean, it comes back to, what is it that you get up for every morning to do? Those things will vary a little bit. Yeah, but ultimately, it comes back to what we talked about before. You've got to clearly understand what you're trying to achieve, purpose. You've got to have a strategy to deliver that purpose. You've got to have a structure in an organisation that hopefully will align to that strategy and help you deliver the purpose. And then you've got to populate that structure with bloody good people. People that are prepared to work hard, people that are prepared to have a bit of fun, people that are prepared to have awkward conversations, deal with the difficult and brutal facts, not sweat the little stuff, but pick up the little bits of rubbish, not let those things accumulate and become big problems, but work, as a group, knowing what the contribution they can make to achieve that ultimate purpose. And if that is to make a 10% return on EBITDA, fine. If that is to convince a drug company to get that drug on the government listed drug agency, maybe even more purposeful in some people's eyes. But ultimately, people choose a job that they want to do. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we all spend a lot of time at work. I've been very fortunate that I've spent a lot of time working in, I guess, a sector or a system that I think contributes incredibly positively to society, and therefore, my motivation button was always on high. But everyone needs to get up in the morning wanting to go and do what they're going to go and do, whatever it is. Not all of us have as much choice as we would like in that. But ultimately, one thing that a really good friend of mine who's no longer with us used to say, you should get up every day and strive to do today what you do today better than you did it yesterday, if that makes sense.
Yeah, get a bit better every day.
Yeah.
But get a bit better at something you care about, because you wanted to get up for it in the first place.
Yeah, that's right.
And so when you look back on your career, and sort of looking at the impact you said, obviously you're lucky to have, or you were intentional as well, obviously, to stay in a sector that you were proud of and wanted to be part of, and a sector that could have a positive impact on society. What are some of the impacts that you're most proud of, that you feel you were able to sort of lead with throughout your career?
I guess in a kind of organisational get things done sense, I talked about the approach we took to being more respectful and inclusive and creating an environment that tackled some of those really difficult issues. I think that's something I'll always be incredibly proud of. I saw our game and certain teams within it help New Zealand deal with some pretty significant moments in history. I think the way the Crusaders rallied after the earthquakes in Christchurch in 2011 and played the entire Super Rugby competition away from home, that was pretty special for the people of that region at the time. We had a terrorist attack in a mosque 2 or 3 years ago, again involved the Christchurch community, and again the Crusaders were called into that debate because all of a sudden people were questioning whether it was appropriate for a rugby team to be named after a group that could be linked to the sort of activities that terrorist who walks into a mosque and shoots people. That was pretty confronting. So I think the way we help in difficult times is really significant. But I guess the most satisfying thing for me, and this would have happened hopefully whether I worked in sport or not, is actually the people that I've worked with, particularly seeing young people come into an organisation, learn some of the things that we've talked about because they've actually experienced them, and then grown and gone on and started to contribute in their own right as older adults. That's ultimately the most satisfying thing, I think, from a work perspective. Yeah.
I love that. So I actually want to take it and flip it on its head. What are some of the biggest impacts some of those young people, maybe your daughters, if you don't mind talking about that if it's appropriate, or young colleagues that you've worked with? What are some of maybe the top lessons you've learned from some of those younger people?
Well, our eldest daughter's in the New Zealand rowing program, which is a brutal high-performance sport in this country. They're very good. They're top of the game on the international scale. Incredibly competitive environment to be selected in, and they go into those dark places that you and I talked about 2 or 3 times a day, and it's unrelenting. I think the way I saw her respond to the disappointment of not going to Tokyo last year was pretty incredible, and prepared to continue to work through what we had a lockdown. We had to build a gym pretty much in our garage for her, so she could stay on track. And here she is now on the verge of hopefully going to Tokyo in a few weeks' time. That's quite inspirational, I think. There's no doubt about that. Youngest daughter's got cystic fibrosis, which is a life-threatening illness. She's just got on with life. Doesn't let her define her, but she doesn't hide from it either. So she openly talks about it. She's now in her 20s and just about to embark on a law career. So you take a lot out of watching young people. I'm really proud of that. But because I'm so old and I've been around so long, I work with a lot of really capable young people who have gone on and done great things. And I've also seen some particularly young men come into professional rugby teams from pretty challenging backgrounds. And if it hadn't been for the game and the opportunities the game gave them, and then they took, because it's one thing to be given an opportunity, it's another thing to take it, they would have had very different lives. Probably ended up on the wrong side of the law. May well now be some, in the statistics that you and I talked about earlier, that I noticed at the beginning of the professional game in our country. And so I'm really proud and inspired by some of those stories, and there are a lot of them. But ultimately, if you're a New Zealander, it's not hard to be inspired every day. We're a small country. We overachieve. I think we do it with integrity. I think we largely do it with humility as well, and even the way we've dealt with this extraordinary event around COVID. We've locked the borders, which made it easy, but we've lived largely without COVID in the community now for the last 12 months. It's come at an enormous economic cost because tourism has been a very, very important part of our economy for a long time. So that sector has really struggled, but we haven't overwhelmed our health system. We haven't had a whole lot of people die of the virus. So we've done that really well. Challenging now because we've got to get a virus rollout underway, and that's taking a bit longer than it should, I think. And, it's funny, isn't it? Your country criticised pretty heavily around its immediate response to the pandemic, but now probably leading the world in reopening because you've jabbed a truckload of people very quickly.
Yeah, I think we're up to nearly 50%. They've had at least one vaccination, and probably around 40% that are vaccinated. And you're like, oh, well, you've got a long way to go, which is true when you think about the size of the country, 300 million people. But actually, it's a heck of a lot of people that have gone through the system. Just a different approach, but it's enabling things to open up. And I've been impressed just looking at different countries and how they've responded. And I think that all the ones that have had the right intent from the start, they've had to choose their own strategy and their own tactics for their own people and their own geography and so on and so forth. And it's been interesting to be part of it. Obviously, I think for all of us, we've all probably learned a lot and had to overcome a lot of challenges, some bigger than others. But yeah, no, it's a hell of an experience, I think, as you can say fairly, for the last 12 months for everybody. And that we got to work together like this, but
right.
We'll hopefully meet over a beer at another point physically.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope so. And I think, I probably should mention the last of our children, because she's a nurse and she graduated out of university and started her first full-time job in a hospital in February of last year, so right at the beginning of the pandemic. So, I used to watch her go off, because, New Zealand, we shut the country down. No one was going anywhere. The roads were deserted. And she was, literally driving through a deserted city to go and be in the front line day in, day out, facing something that none of us had ever experienced before. This pandemic has been quite an extraordinary event. And you're right, every country's had to deal with it in different ways. There's no playbook for it. But yeah, there's an inspiration in everybody, isn't there?
Well, you must be so incredibly proud of your daughters, and obviously wishing them all of every success with their future endeavours. And that's a nice way to tee up our last question, actually. So we talk about Purpose Fuse. You say we've got a Purpose Fuse formula for individuals just to try to simplify purpose. We unpack it quite significantly, but at the headline level, purpose equals passion plus impact plus application. And so with our guests, it's quite a nice thing to ask at the end, in that if you wanted to summarize in one word or up to one sentence for each of these, what you feel you've been most passionate about, how you've been able to apply that passion in the world, and the impact that you feel that's had. I'd love to end on that.
Well, as I think you probably gauged from our conversation, I'm very passionate about people. I think we're very fortunate to be a species that is highly developed and communicates. And you think what technology's enabled us to be able to do as an organism in a universe that we don't yet understand. So I'm very passionate about people, no question. That's the thing that's driven me for life. I love working with people. I love meeting people. I love socialising with people. I love sitting around a fire with my mates and having a few beers. They're the things that drive me. I think I've been able to, build on that passion by having had some opportunities, and there's a little bit of luck in that. But I always say people that work hard tend to have more good luck than those that don't. So there's a bit of that. Work ethic's really important. I've always applied myself. I've taken those opportunities, been prepared to dig in when the going's been tough. And I think you've certainly in sport and in this country, if you're involved in rugby, you've got to have a pretty thick skin, because everyone's got an opinion, and you don't win every game and you don't get everything right, and there's always somebody with a view. You can't get in a taxi or an Uber without being told what's going wrong in rugby in this country if you sit in some of the seats that I've sat in. But it's been fun, So, I think the answer to your last question, other people really need to judge that, because that's the way it should be. But for me, the critical thing has been watching some of the people that I've been lucky enough to work with go on and become parents, become great New Zealanders, and contribute to this beautiful little country we live in.
Well, that's a pretty humble answer from somebody who was leading the sports franchise that won 2 World Cups during his tenure.
We also didn't win 2, Mark. Just so. 2003. Often, coaches often talk about you learn more from losing than you do from winning, and I think there's an element of that for sure. In '96, which was the first year of professional rugby, went down to Christchurch to take the seat at the Crusaders in Canterbury. We came last. The Crusaders were terrible. No disrespect to the founding members of that really successful franchise, and many of them I'm still in contact with, and a lot of them are contributing to the game today because they've gone on. The passion they got for the game has stayed with them, and they're now coaching or administrating or whatever the role might be. But coming last that year was a pivotal moment, And sometimes, you've got to go to that point, to confront the awkward reality, the brutal facts of where you're at, and B, because those experiences often are more telling than winning. Having said that, it's always fun to drink out of a cup.
Yeah, I was just trying to celebrate the success, but I fully take your point. You can only improve and start anything from a place of truth, and that starts with confronting the brutal facts, doesn't it? So, but Steve, I really appreciate your time. Really enjoyed our conversation. There's a lot of golden nuggets in there for people to take away. So really appreciate your time and dialing in from a hotel there to be with us today. So thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, Mark. Maybe if I just add one more thing, I think might help. That we talk about learning from losing, but you also can learn from winning. And I think a lot of successful businesses are really good at capturing what the ingredients are today that are making them successful and what they've got to add to those ingredients to continue to be able to thrive. But not everybody does that. A lot of people don't review success, they only review failure, and that can be a mistake too. So anyway, look, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sorry I'm not in more salubrious surroundings. I'd like to be at home in front of my wine cellar, which one day I'm going to welcome you into.
Oh, I look forward to that. I've got a cousin over there, so I've got a great excuse to come over again. I was there for the Rugby World Cup in 2011 and said I would always be back. So I'll take you up on that, Steve. Thank you.
You'll be very welcome. My pleasure.
Cheers.